Bismillah, alhamdulillah, assalamu alaikum, peace be upon all of you. So in the previous videos, I've talked about the brain changes going on with adolescence, the different connectivity and some different chemical features. And to illustrate that, age 12 to 25, roughly, it's a period of constant change, neurological change, and growth more so than any other time in a human being's life. So this change means that, adolescents are, the way they are is less permanent than at any other age in their life, certainly in the years after adolescence. And they have more capacity and ability to change during this time and to grow. And that's true in the long term over the whole course of adolescence. But it's also true that they have an ability to change in a moment-to-moment basis, unlike people do at other times in their age, both childhood and adulthood. And you see this with teenagers all the time. And this feature, this is called neuroplasticity in the brain. Like their brains are literally more supple and more flexible, and literally more capable of changing from a moment-to-moment basis. And you see with teenagers all the time, if you're in a school, in high school, between classes, they get out in the hallways and they're in their peer interaction mode, and they're all uppity and acting with exaggerated behaviors. They come into the classroom, and very quickly, you find them in an entirely other mode. They might turn into a bored mode. They might turn into a very serious and much more sophisticated mode. And they can transition from those things very quickly. Having done a lot of teaching of adults in my life too, it's really interesting, because when you're doing learning activities with adults versus with high schoolers, you see really clearly, like, adults have a much not harder time, but it takes them much longer to transition from one thing to the other. And, if you are teaching adults and you give a 10-minute break or a 15-minute break, adults will be more late coming back from those breaks than teenagers will, because they actually take more time. They a lot of times take more time to transition from one thing to the next. Something that happens with teenagers, by the way, too, they act differently with different people very easily and very fluidly, and much of that is a learning process and an experimental process for them. It's also a feature of them trying to guard their own insecurity. And you will see teenagers and adolescents, especially teenagers, accusing one another of being fake a lot because of this, because they see one another acting one way in one situation, acting a different way in another situation. They see each other do that a lot, so they call each other out on it. But at the same time, each one of them is also very insecure about the fact that they probably do the same thing in a lot of ways. And of course, if you've studied psychology, usually when people criticize other people, especially in a personal way, it's usually because they project onto that person some negative aspect that they see in themselves. So this is common with teenagers. So a really interesting thing about teenagers is they're in the time of their lives where they have more potential for growth and more ability to change in their life. Yet there's also reasons why they tend to think of themselves in a more permanent way at this time of their life than at any other. Why is that? Well, with the changes, another feature of the changes going on in the brain and the ability to interconnect ideas better, along with that comes a gradual increase in being less self-centered. I should say a gradual decrease in being self-centered, though they're still very self-centered, especially compared to adults, but decreasingly so. And that means an increasing awareness of others, and an increase in ability to formulate abstract thoughts. Though again, it's not in ways that are completely mature like they will be in adulthood. So with this comes an increasing ability and tendency to formulate the thoughts that others might be having, thoughts that others might be having in their own minds, projecting thoughts onto other people. But because they're still immature and they're still self-centered, it's most likely the thoughts that they are most frequently going to project onto other people are going to be thinking about thoughts that other people are having about themselves. So they become very, very worried about what other people think of them. And also because this is like a new ability to do it, they have a tendency to sort of exercise that ability a lot as they find it. So this is something kids do a lot. And, it causes them to have a really increased awareness about like what their personal attributes are, and have a tendency to sort of think of those things as something determined, when really they are less determined at this point in their life than ever, because they have more potential to change them. So this is where being very, very self-aware as an adult or teacher or parent in who's in the life of young people, this is where it's really important to be aware of what you are projecting onto them with the way you talk to them. Because they are likely to take it in a permanent way and then act it out, if you project onto them. So a really common example with this for adolescents, when school starts to get more difficult, and as you enter middle and high school, organizing yourself around school becomes a whole different thing, and there's always students who struggle with it. So there's always students who are getting behind on their work and not completing things. And so teachers, parents, they get upset about this. Now, parents really won't like this. They won't want kids to do this. They want them to be responsible. This is also something, when it goes on, it triggers in parents their own insecurities, because maybe, everyone's disorganized to some degree. So it implants like a fear in them that, oh, my kid's going to start turning out that way, and they really don't want them to. Now, if this causes a parent to tell their kid that they're lazy, or that they're being lazy, and this happens all the time, and they maybe were being lazy, the kid is very likely to internalize that, and especially if they hear it multiple times, and then say to themselves, okay, I'm lazy. And then they take it on as a way for them to act, as their default mode of behavior. And this is the way I operate about things. I'm lazy. So as a teacher, teaching like kids who are 16, 17, I find it all the time that, kids, they don't do work or something like this. The reason why, they will just say, it's because I'm lazy. And if you start to unpack why that is, it's a lot of times because they've been told this many times before. And now they just think it's some sort of personality trait that they have that they can't really change. So this is something that needs to be undone when kids start to think this, and it's better for them to really not have the idea planted in the first place. Now again, none of this ever means that you don't set boundaries with them and you don't hold them accountable. So when a kid doesn't do something, you do hold them accountable. But again, you want to access their intrinsic motivation, and you want to make them understand their own thought process that leads to these predictable behaviors that they have, such as being disorganized or not completing things. So, being disorganized and not completing things, that it comes from procrastination. It comes from putting things off for too long before you have enough time to complete it. The common thought process that causes people to procrastinate, young and old, and that young people especially don't have the developed ability to grapple with yet, but the common thought process that undergirds procrastination is the person is thinking too much about the end result of what they need to do, and not enough about the process that they need to do, and especially not enough about the initial first steps in the process of what they need to do. And therefore, the most difficult, when they think too much like that, what becomes the most difficult thing for them to do is the initial first steps in the process. So this type of thinking, this dynamic of thinking, a young adolescent People of lots of ages, adolescents, they're very likely to fall into this type of thinking, of feeling overburdened and thinking too much about the completed project, or sometimes thinking in too excited a way about how good they want the final product to turn out, what they want the final result to be, dwelling too much on that to the point where it seems too far away, so they don't even step into the process at all. This is what causes procrastination. And as a teacher or a parent, you have to explain to kids when they fall into this that this is a common thought process that people fall into, instead of calling them lazy. Because now you're starting to give them the mental understanding that will allow them to adopt different habits. And now, something that adolescents will struggle with also, with lots of things, they might not be able to easily identify what the first steps in a process towards getting a project done is. And even if they need, so you might have to help identify that for them. That's legitimate work or scaffolding that as a teacher or parent, you want to do for your kids in these situations. And you might even walk through the first few steps with them to get them moving, and then gradually release them through it so that they start to feel the confidence of getting done what they need to get done and seeing how progress is actually made.